On this week's podcast, we're going to talk about holidays. 'Tis the season after all. What does the Bible say about holidays, or holy days, as it is? Should we celebrate them? Can we celebrate them? Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Ears to Hear. We appreciate you joining us for this week's podcast. Andrew, how are you doing today?
John, I'm doing well.
Good. So we are going to be talking about holidays. We just had Thanksgiving, gathered with family and friends.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Had the fatted bird, all that good stuff. And we're looking forward to the end of this year, December. We're recording this, what is today? Today's December 2nd.
December 2nd, yep.
So I noticed in town tonight there was some sort of parade or something going on. I thought it was kind of early for a parade. I don't know. I didn't. But anyway, they were gathering and the firemen were there and they had had something going on. So had carolers going around. Anyway, I'll stop carrying on about it. But it's Christmas.
Oh, yeah. You can't escape it at this point.
Yep. So I thought, and it was your suggestion that we talk about holidays. Should we celebrate them? Can we celebrate them? And just in thinking about that idea, there are folks out there who are staunchly opposed to celebrating holidays.
Yeah,
there are religions that don't believe in celebrating any holiday and not even birthdays or anything like that.
And on the opposite side, there's some for whom holidays may be the most religiously minded time of the year for them. Or
wait a minute, that sounds like a Christmas song.
Perhaps
that's most
it's
wonderful.
The most religiously minded time of the year. Yes, that's a song. Or perhaps the only time they find themselves in a church. So there's definitely both sides of people's opinions on this.
Yep, very much so. And I will say, I mean, you see that fairly often, that people will be more religiously minded around Christmas and Easter, and if they happen to be visiting with us, we welcome them in, and we hope that they can worship in spirit and truth along with us as we teach the gospel. So there are those who believe in them, there are those who don't believe in them. So where do we want to start, Andrew? Which direction do we want to head with it in answering our question? Should we? Can we? Where you want to go with it first?
Well, often as we do on subjects like this, I think...
Am I going to have to say we are not official holiday experts?
It says time for another one of our caveats. We're not, I don't know what a holiday expert is, but okay.
Whatever it is, we're not.
Definitely. I was thinking we'd maybe start by just a look at the Old Testament and the history of God's people and their relationship with holidays, because if we go all the way back to the old law, and arguably even before, there were things that were memorialized and there were things that were remembered. And once we get to the old law, the old covenant, there were days like the Day of Atonement or the Year of Jubilee. Yep. There were events.
There were weekly observances, annual observances, and then like the Year of Jubilee. Wasn't that like every 50 years?
I believe so. Every 50 years.
Like every 7 Sabbath years or however it phrases that, but I think it's every 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so because I think it was 7 cycles of the land lying fallow every 7 years, so then one more year plus 49 got you to 50 years, and you forgive all debts, you release slaves. It was a big reset. Yeah,
and a big celebration. I mean, it's called the Year of Jubilee.
Yeah. So anyway, all this to say that God's people had a close relationship with calendar days and observance of days.
Yeah, I think actually when they are released from bondage. And that language when they're celebrating the Passover. Now, I mean, it's the first Passover. And the Lord actually says this will be your beginning of years. Mm-hmm. It was basically the beginning of the Jewish calendar.
Right.
And so you have, which it was a lunar calendar, but you have these things being implemented. You had holy days, you had holy, all these things happening.
And are you referring to the Exodus from Egypt when that started? I think, too, I I may be remembering wrong, but I want to say also when the Jews returned from Babylonian captivity, they restarted their calendar after they rebuilt the wall and the temple.
Yeah.
They basically started their calendar again from that point.
Because I knew they got off at some point, and they adopted wherever
Right.
they were, the Babylonian calendar.
So they switched back from the calendar of their captors and returned to observing the Passover as they had before, and they observed the feast days as they hadn't since
Right.
generations prior.
Right.
So yeah, it was a big part of Jewish custom and law, and some days were required. Some days were given directly by God, and
Yeah.
as a command that you will observe these days, and this is how you ought to do this.
And that's one of the things he condemns them for, because they stopped.
Yeah.
At one point, and they weren't keeping some of the days like they were supposed to.
I think it was under one of the kings where it was the Feast of Booths, where they were supposed to, stay in tents for a period of time to remember their
Right.
travels. And I can't remember the king now, but when it was reinstated, I think the comment was it wasn't since Joshua they had done it. So it was a long time separated from
Right.
what they should have been doing.
Right. And within that, as we made mention of, they adopted the form when they were off in captivity, and they adopted that calendar. That there is one example of that, because you start having different months being mentioned,
Mhm.
and so they started adopting the foreign calendar. But one of the accounts when they're in captivity is the account of Esther, and one of the things that happens at the end of Esther after Mordecai and the Jews defeat their enemies, and there is the celebration of, and you looked it up, what was it? Was it Purim? Was that the one that was Purim?
Yeah. That celebration that was instituted at the end of the book of Esther has, down through the years, become the Jewish holiday of Purim.
And it doesn't look like that was mandated by God. They were celebrating their victory.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no indication at the end of Esther. So this is not a God-given holiday.
Right.
I mean, all these others, the Day of Atonement, the Festival of Booths, the Passover, I feel like I'm leaving several out. All those are God-given.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you will do this on this day. And there were, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm thinking of on the Passover, if you could not keep the Passover because you were unclean, that there was, you could partake of it the next month, is what I'm thinking of, if memory serves. So there were, the Lord made allowances, or made, whatever the word I'm looking for is, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
But it's a God-given holiday, but Purim was not. And there's no indication at the end of Esther that that God was displeased with it.
Right.
It just, that's what it was. And that was not the only man-made holiday that they celebrated. Another one is to look, as we've looked at the Old Testament. So you have the Old Testament, you have the New Testament, but then you have that time frame in the middle, the intertestamental period. That's a real, don't you love that phrase? It's like for those 400 years, if you would have asked the people who were living then, we're living in the intertestamental period. And it's just that time frame between Malachi and the time that really John the Baptist starts preaching.
Right.
But within that, we know you had the Maccabean revolt that happened. And when that happened, and when the Jews were victorious, they implemented what is now referred to as Hanukkah. That was the beginning of Hanukkah. Hanukkah goes back to that, and that is one of the holidays, and it's a man-made holiday,
Mm-hmm.
that is actually mentioned in the New Testament. This is John chapter 10, at verse 22, and it's just in passing. It's just a time frame when it says, "Now it was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple on Solomon's porch." And that's where he makes the phrase, "My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me." But that was the time.
Yep.
It was Hanukkah. And so there's never any indication that it was wrong to celebrate that. But so then the question is, well, how could they celebrate that? Because, these are holidays.
Mm-hmm.
So God never said, "Thou shalt keep Purim," or "Thou shalt keep Hanukkah." So how would we answer that? How could they do that?
Well, what we start to see, the picture that's forming is, if God institutes a day as a holy day or as an actual religious holiday sanctioned by God, then yes, one ought to keep that. But that there's also no indication of condemnation for setting up our own memorials that remind us of things that God did. I'm sure that the idea of the Jewish people being delivered in the time of Esther, or being delivered during the Maccabean era, I'm sure that those involved prayers and thanksgiving and were observed very similarly to how the other religious holidays would have been observed. One more that I thought of was the memorial in the Jordan when they crossed over before taking Jericho, and they set the stones. Now, I think God may have commanded that specifically, or maybe it was at Joshua's command. I can't remember exactly, but it was not really a holiday, but a memorial. Yeah, another way to remember.
Still, the concept is there,
right? So the concept is there that those things that people wish to remember, if it's remembering something that God has blessed them with or something that God has done for them, there's no condemnation of that in Scripture. There's no holding back of people who want to observe something that God has done and set up a day, even if God hasn't specifically requested it, in order to do so.
Sorry, I was just thinking, not to be a Debbie Downer here, but in the same context, there's another heap of memorial stones. It says the same thing about Achan after they stoned him, and it says that it served as a memorial and was still there till that day.
Maybe not.
And that they needed to remember good things and they needed to remember bad things.
Right.
And regardless, it serves as a memorial. That concept is there.
Yeah, and therein I think is a good lesson that it deviates from this topic of holidays, but it's worth remembering the low points in one's history just as much as high points. You ought not to forget past evils that need to be learned from.
I did not realize we were going to go in this direction on the podcast, but it is interesting. We just celebrated Thanksgiving, or those who did celebrate it, Thanksgiving. And we know somewhat what we were taught as little children in kindergarten does not necessarily reflect what actually happened historically.
The circumstances around the colonizing of North America were not pretty for the native inhabitants. And inhabitants.
There is a negative side to it.
Yes.
In the reality of it. With Jesus and with Jesus' birth, and we're not saying that the Lord was born on December 25th, but he was born at some point. And one of the things that usually gets omitted from the nativity scenes is when Jesus was born, and within short order, Herod kills all the male children in Bethlehem. That part usually gets left out of the nativity scene, and yet it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm simply saying, when we really explore and we really remember what happened, we don't look at it through rose-tinted glasses, or at least we shouldn't. We should recognize what happened in reality.
Yeah, and to get back on subject, nothing against holidays being joyous occasions either.
Yes.
That's not our point. But yeah, I think good or bad, there's value in remembering things. And the example we have from the Old Testament is there's nothing condemning setting up holidays in addition to God-given holidays, as long as it keeps in the same spirit of honoring God for his blessings.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to Christianity, and now, because that whole parallel of God-given holidays, we don't really see that repeated in the New Testament. In fact, we don't see that repeated in the New Testament. There are not years or days to observe. The closest thing to it is the observance of the Lord's Supper. And the example we have there in the New Testament is that it is not a yearly occasion, but it was every first day of the week when they came together to break bread. That was their act of worship and remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. So that's the only day given to us as Christians in the New Testament that is actually an official day. If you wanted to, we don't call it a holiday. We don't call Sunday a holiday, but it's the only example we have in the New Testament of a specifically prescribed day.
Yeah, and it is referred to as, I don't know if you'd use the word special. I don't really have a problem with it. But when John was on the island of Patmos, and it says he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and it's referred to that way. Not to say that the Lord doesn't, all the days belong to the Lord. Everything belongs to the Lord, but still it is referred to as the Lord's Day, and that you have the weekly observance. But as you think about the Christians and as they live their lives, and you have Jews and you have Gentiles. So you have Jews and Gentiles trying to get along, and we've already established, we've already touched on liberties. And liberties are an odd thing, and if you wanted to define liberties, and I know we've had podcasts about this before, but how would you quickly define liberties?
I would say it's
whether you do or you do not.
Yeah, it's something where you could go either way.
And it's you consider the other person, and you think about their conscience, but whether it's eating or not eating, as long as you do it to the Lord, it is accepted by the Lord. And as long as it doesn't cause your brother to stumble, it is, then the Lord condones it, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at Galatians and we look at Colossians, you have two different circumstances. And which one you want to start with, Andrew? You want to start with Galatians or Colossians? Which one you want to go to first?
I guess we can start with the one in Galatians since it's a little more contained.
Okay.
In Galatians 4 and around verse 10, Paul's talking to them about, he's talking to them about, the error that some of them were committing in trying to go back to the old law and trying to, bind the old practices of the Jewish faith. He says in verse 8, "Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. But you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God. How can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to become once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain." So whether he's talking there to just the Jews who want to go back to the old law, or if they were formerly pagan or had other rituals or festivals that they observed.
And it looks like he's talking to the Gentiles, and we know what the Judaizers are doing. The Judaizers are trying to drag the Gentiles back into it.
Yep.
So you have these Gentiles, because he says later on, he says, verse 12, "I urge you to become like me, for I became like you." And when he says there in verse 8, "Indeed, when you did not know God, you served those which by nature are not gods." They were pagans, they were Gentiles. They become Christians. The Judaizers get a hold of them, and then the Judaizers are like, "Hey, you guys need to be circumcised in the flesh, and you need to keep these holy days." And Paul's like, no. It's like, I put those things behind me. To the Gentiles, I became like a Gentile. So here he is, and he's like, wait a minute, I became like a Gentile, and here you guys, what are you doing? You're becoming like the Jews. So anyway, carry on. So they're going back. They're going back to the Old Testament.
Right. So, to the Jews, they're trying to backtrack.
Right.
They want to go back to enforcing things the way they were, and enforcing
because
the Jewish way.
They thought they were justified by the law.
Right. And
and that's Galatians. It's like, that's Galatians. It's like, if you think you're justified by the law, you've fallen from grace.
Right.
You don't understand it.
Right. And all of this, with the subject of liberties, is exactly what we see Paul say about other liberties, which is liberties are not to be bound just because you feel that you wish to keep doing them. It's not something you can enforce on other people, because, as we said, you can go either way. As long as you're doing it to the Lord, to eat or not to eat, to observe or not to observe, it's something that shouldn't be enforced. And I think that leads into then the verse in Colossians.
Yeah.
Because here we almost see kind of the opposite idea, which is...
and if you don't understand it, you're like, well, these things contradict one another.
You could think that, yeah. Because in Colossians, it almost kind of says, do what you want. This is Colossians 2, and then in verse 16, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food or drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substances belong to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by a sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head," referring to Christ, "from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God." And also that that word there, asceticism, the idea in this passage is that there were those who were forbidding any kind of indulgence or any kind of enjoyment of physical things. They thought that true religion was ultimate self-deprival, and you couldn't enjoy anything in life. You couldn't really take part in any of those things. So they were trying to ban festivals or new moons or Sabbaths, because they thought that those things were sensual or too physical.
And the Jews would also be included in this because they were like, unclean meats.
Mm-hmm.
And they would start judging things, and they would say, "Oh, well, you're more holy if you abstain from these things."
Right.
So they had that hint of abstaining as well.
Yep. And the whole point here, Paul's saying with regard to this abstinence is, he's like, look, don't let people cast judgment on you if you wish to observe a festival or a new moon. So, we read in Galatians where he's saying, oh, don't bind these festivals, don't bind these holidays on these people who are coming into the faith. You don't need to enforce them to go back to the old ways. And then when we're talking here in Colossians, he's kind of saying, look, you don't have to put away these things just because there's those who wish that you would.
Yeah. And like I said, it's liberties.
Mm-hmm.
If you start trying to bind liberties in Galatians, it's like, no, you cannot do that.
Right.
You cannot drag them back. But if you want to do these things in Galatians, it's like, let no one judge you in these things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bind them one way or the other. And it's, I was just thinking about there in Colossians, and here we are, and we're still dealing with things pertaining to the Judaizers and these issues. And you see what really gave them liberty was, and it's Colossians 2 at verse 14, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross.
Right.
Sometimes folks have the idea that, in that first century, even after Jesus went to the cross, that the law was still in effect. And it's like it wasn't. He nailed it to the cross. Now, could you still keep the Sabbath? Yes, you could. You could still be circumcised in your flesh. You could. You
Mm-hmm.
could do those things because it's now a liberty.
Right.
But the moment you start saying, hey, we're keeping these things, and we're going to make you keep these things because of the law, and that's Paul's argument. No, the law, these things that are against us, they were nailed to the cross.
Yeah.
Now, let no one judge you in these matters.
And he would say elsewhere too that don't try to tie your salvation or anyone's salvation to
Right.
whether you keep these traditions or not. He would say to them that if you're going to try to bind a part of the law, you might as well be, if you try to do that, you might as well be fully guilty under the whole law because
Right.
you're trying to bind part of it. So by being liberties, these things aren't tied to one's salvation. They don't become necessary for one to be right with God to observe or not to observe. So sometimes we might stray on the side of, well, we don't want to observe any religious holidays, or, oh, we want to be really careful not to touch Christmas or Easter or anything like that. And the point with those things being liberties is, you're not endangering yourself by wishing to observe a thing that God has done or memorialize something that God has done.
Yeah.
Now, to the other side of that, because it's a liberty, that's also why we don't do it, in an official capacity or in a church-wide capacity, where knowing that there would be some who may not feel like doing that or feel comfortable observing that, we don't wish to bind it on the whole group for that very reason.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. It's like you have to consider the liberties. You have to consider the other person. So, in my notes, I just asked, is this a church function? And the question is, well, how could it be? If you have those who do not believe in celebrating it, are you going to, well, okay, we're going to have the celebrators and the non-celebrators can stay home? Well, that's divisive. Now, if you have faith about it, keep it to yourself. That's what he says about liberties.
Sure.
But, I feel like concerning some of the things that happen as a church function, it almost just comes down to entertainment. And it becomes less memorial and more it's the show. and my kids and my grandkids are, going to be playing the wise men and the donkey or something. I don't know, whatever the case may be. But
for me, it's the music, the songs that are associated with religious holidays. I like that music. So it's like, is it all about liking the show tunes, or is it,
Right.
is it about the observance?
Yeah. So in one way, can it be a church function? And I don't see how it can be.
Yeah.
And you don't see it in Scripture, frankly.
Right. Well,
Like we've already shown. It's like you just don't see it. If the Lord wanted it, frankly, if God wanted us to know what day Jesus was born on, he would have revealed it. And he didn't. Does that mean we're not thankful for the Lord's birth? That's not what that means.
right.
And I think that's where sometimes we somewhat drop the ball, that when people say, "Oh, we cannot celebrate the Lord's birth." And it's like, "Wait a minute. Did you hear what you just said?" And it's like we should be thankful that the Word became flesh. If we're not thankful for that, something's wrong. I mean, sorry, but it does start sounding, when the wise men and the shepherds came and they praised God that the Messiah had been born, and we are thankful that happened. In my notes, I put, we just celebrated Thanksgiving. So guess what Johnny preached on, a week ago or 2 weeks ago?
Much to the shock of everyone.
I know. I preached on being thankful, and it seems like, what do we do? Look through one of the Psalms?
Yeah.
It seems like is what we did. And is that okay? Is it a Thanksgiving, is it a Thanksgiving show? No, it's not a pageant. That's not what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's turning to God's word, and it's, being thankful.
Yeah. Or frankly, our last episode was focused on Thanksgiving as well.
Yeah.
Tied with the time of the year. And there's nothing wrong with having something that turns your mind toward things of God,
Right.
and thinking on the blessings of God, whether that's his son, whether that's his providence and care for us throughout the year. In talking too about holidays in general, the idea of New Year's, reflecting on the year past and what you want to accomplish in the year to come. As Christians, we're told to look back, and we're told to look ahead. We're told to make plans for ourselves and to make efforts to examine ourselves,
To be reflective.
Absolutely.
And to have resolve and things like that.
Yeah. So I guess
you made the point before we started recording. The argument about Christmas is what? Well, we don't know when he was born.
Yeah.
And that's the argument. So therefore, thou shalt not be thankful for the Lord's birth on December 25th. In case you don't recognize, that was sarcasm. And it's like, we should be thankful that the Lord was born, like I already said.
Sure.
But the oddity is about Easter, because with Easter, what do we have?
We do know when Easter is. To connect it to the day of Jesus' death and resurrection, we know because it was around Passover.
So, I mean, we can't make the same argument about Easter that people make about Christmas. It's like, we know when it was. We know what time of year it was.
Right. And I don't want to go into the whole history of Christmas or history of modern Easter, where it's like, well, there was the pagan holiday that was the winter solstice, and then that got combined with this, the day itself changes. It's about what you as a person are reflecting on, and what you as an individual, choose to, whether you choose to observe it or you choose to just be thankful at other times. It's a time to, be thankful to God.
Yeah, very much so. One more verse, and I should have brought it up earlier, but it's Matthew chapter 7.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I just wanted to bring it up just because I felt like it, frankly. This is Matthew 7 at verse 11, and it's in the context of the Lord's generosity, frankly. Frankly, it's seeking the kingdom, and it's verse 7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. But then what he does is he uses them somewhat to help them see it. He says, if you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Even those who are wicked give gifts to their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not wrong. And it's not wrong to give gifts to your children, and how much more so our Heavenly Father. And that's in the context of the Holy Spirit and the kingdom. Anyway, I think sometimes folks, it's not right, we shouldn't celebrate.
Yeah.
And that just seems odd to me.
We don't want to, we're not commanding anyone to do something they're uncomfortable with.
No.
But there's no reason to err so far on the side of caution as to discount an opportunity for Thanksgiving.
To stop being thankful.
Yeah.
And to stop being generous.
Or to stop reflecting on what God has done.
Like you said, I mean, it is not as though something that turns our mind towards God is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it can work backwards, and it just occurs to me, there's an example of that in reverse, and it is in the Old Testament, the brazen serpent.
Mm-hmm.
That when you have the account of, I guess it's the serpents, and anybody who looked on the serpent was saved.
Yeah, and that serpent would become a relic.
It would, yeah.
And it would be carried on through the generations as an object of worship.
And they start treating it like an idol. So something that is good, not that the power was in the device itself, it was in God, but something that started off good became evil.
Yeah.
And I think it was Hezekiah, if I'm remembering right, who destroyed it. And he just had to destroy it. It had become evil. But what we're talking about, it's the same thing, but just in reverse. Mm-hmm. Something bad can become good. Something good can become bad. Something bad can become good in that sense. And what I mean by that is, just because you see if someone has a Christmas tree, you automatically assume that they are worshipers of Baal and they're bowing down to some foreign god, right? Isn't that what, having a 6-foot spruce tree in your living room, doesn't that mean that you're bowing down to the pagan gods of old? It's like, no, that's not what that means. It may have meant something 1,500 years ago, but that's not necessarily what it means for us today.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay to give presents to your children, to your family, to your loved ones, to your friends, to your enemies. And it's okay to reflect on God and reflect on His Son and be thankful and be generous and rejoice. We've made it through 2021. Huzzah. We've made it. So anyway, perhaps this helps. But if someone has a problem with it, frankly, they shouldn't do it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And there's perfectly legitimate reasons where you may not want to. To your point about the serpent, what comes right after Thanksgiving every year? We get a huge surge of consumer spending, and we get a huge surge of a focus on things and goods and stuff. Right. So often our holidays are so commercialized that it can become an avenue for greed instead of an avenue for thankfulness or contentment. So yeah, it's a matter of where our focus is going to be, and you can pollute it and observe it poorly, and your focus can be on the wrong things just as easily as one can use it as an opportunity for good and reflecting on the good that God has done.
And I will say that is the very context of Matthew 6 and 7, or at least a part of it, because that's the context of don't worry about what you eat, what you drink, what you wear.
Yeah.
After all these things the Gentiles seek, but seek first the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And while he says, if you being evil know how to give gifts to your children, how much more so your Father will give, as he says, will give good things to those who ask him. Well, what are those good things? And it's the better gifts.
Right.
We're not trying to appeal to greed and consumerism. And I think being thankful and being thoughtful and being generous, those are also good things.
Absolutely.
So anyway, any other thoughts or anything you want to bring up, Andrew, or are we done?
I don't think so. I think that covers what I had.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I thought it was a good discussion and pertinent to the time.
Yeah. Wish everyone a good holiday season if they are so inclined.
If they are so inclined. There you go. Appreciate everyone joining us for this week's podcast. Hope everyone stays safe, and I hope you tune in next week. Thank you for having ears to hear.
We pray.